anyway, thank you for coming. I was hoping for a bigger crowd, but again, it is so nice out there. We didn't know if that meant people would come or people would stay away, so whatever. But this is still a very nice crowd. Just a couple of things before we begin. One is, we're missing our president tonight. Most of you know that when you walk in that door, you always see Elaine Patterson behind the desk. But if you don't know, today she moved into her new pad across the street at the Corcoran House.
Oh.
How about that? And she said that, and she did say that she did not want to leave the cat alone on its first night. So she's going to stay over there, and that's okay. He'll be back on Saturday. Just a couple of things coming up. The scheduling of this, which I did, was a problem, but I have to live with it. But only 2 weeks from tonight is our next program, and that's going to be an open house and the celebration of our 120th anniversary of the building of the Holder Memorial. We have people coming in. We have State Rep Kilcoyne will be here. This is starting at 6:30 with a fairly brief reception, I guess you'd call it, and a little ceremony. So the State Rep Kilcoyne will be here. Matt Kobus will represent the Select Board. We have Bill Holder, who's a member of the family, of the Holder family, will say a few words, and our president, Elaine Patterson. And then from 7 to 9, we'll have the place open up, and we are working on a new room, which is just about done. That's kind of dedicated to Gordon Langton. There's a lot of his material upstairs, but also in the same room would be artifacts from that whole complex, whether it was Bigelow Carpeting, the doll shop, whatever. It's almost all up in the back, the rear part of the Holder room. So we hope you'll be here for that event. 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have an anniversary cake, and we'll go crazy. So anyway, all right. After that, of course, that's our last regular program of the year. July 18, we're back in the park for Classic Car Night and the Oldies concert. Should be better than ever. We've even got Union Street now blocked off, so it should be even bigger than last time out. We've got some more food trucks coming too. And on Sunday, August 25, is the vintage baseball doubleheader at Fuller Field. That's not really our program, but we're helping out at it. The first game is going to be a Clinton team against a vintage team using vintage rules, which ought to be interesting because I don't think the Clinton guys know what they're getting into, but because that might mean barehanded or what looks like a garden glove that they're using to field a baseball. And then the second game are two vintage teams that play in that Essex League. So, all right, tonight we have Bodies on the Move. It's a little history of St. John's Church, the early church, and then the big controversy that happened at the turn of the last century. To start off, a lot of people say they don't really know the story, and I'm not sure if anybody knows the real story behind it all. But suffice it to say that when the reservoir came in, the state claimed the cemetery, St. John's Cemetery. At the time, it was 50 years old, and you can imagine the Catholics in town, or anyone who's lost a loved one, having the fact that they're going to have to dig up every single body and move every single body to a new location. A committee was formed, and then that committee kind of fractured, and pretty soon it ended up with two separate committees that were infighting all the time. That was really bad for the parish, but at least then it was parishioners kind of knocking heads with other parishioners. After that was all resolved, and it took a legal case to do it, then came the next conflict, which was far more serious, and that was the new united group of parishioners against the pastor. And that got kind of gory and practically bloody at that point. And the only way it cleared up was when the parishioners went to the bishop and said, "Get that guy out of here." And when he was transferred things settled down after that. So that's going to be the story that you hear anyway. All right. I gave this talk, I created this talk in about 1985. And so some of the slides are original from then, and I've added a few new ones. But it has been a while since I gave it, so unfortunately, I'm going to have to really play it close to the script. Sorry about that. All right. So anyway, the Catholic Church in Clinton, a kind of a history. The first Catholic Mass was celebrated on the banks of the Nashua River, right around that corner there, really right there. A priest by the name of Father Gibson from Worcester would come out to Clinton every 6 or 8 weeks and celebrate Mass on the shores of the Nashua. And they were getting, of course, more and more Catholics were coming in, and they obviously wanted to attend Mass, and that was how the bishop handled things at the time. Later on, and I think in inclement weather in the winter time, and then later on, the Bigelows, who were staunch Protestants, of course, allowed the Catholics to hold their Mass in the Bigelow housing, the mill housing on Main Street. And so that was a pretty big step for the Bigelows. But I think, again, many of their workers were probably Catholics, and they understood that they weren't going to knock heads with their workers, and so they allowed that. But that was a big move for the Bigelows, who, again, the whole town was founded by Protestants, not Catholics. So this is Father John Boyce, and he ended up to be the very first pastor of St. John's Church. And he served for 15 years, from 1847 to 1862. And he's the one that built the very first St. John's Church, which we have right here. Of course, no pictures. It's up near Charlie Moran's house on Main Street. Many of us go by it and probably don't even notice it. But there's a little marker in the hedges that marks the spot where this little chapel was. It was dedicated in 1850 and demolished in 1874, and it sat 250 people. And this is the only evidence of it right here, the historical marker.
Harry, what's the address on that?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Because mail is not delivered to it. No, just kidding. No, I don't know. It's in front of Kayezy. It was Kayezy's house. I don't think that's in the same family anymore, but everybody in Clinton still refers to that house as Kayezy's anyway. Here's a closer look at that plaque. All right. And there's a lot to read here. Probably the most significant event that happened at this little wooden church, this little wooden chapel, was the funeral of its pastor. And the pastor was Dennis O'Keefe, Father Dennis O'Keefe. And he was about the third or fourth pastor of St. John's Church, this being the building. And when he died, his funeral mass was, of course, at this church. And he only ended up serving for 5 months. And he died at 29 years old. And in those 5 months, he was just beloved by the parish. It just seemed like he brought everybody together. And it was quite moving, the article about his funeral. They said emotions ran high with men, women, and children sobbing openly. They couldn't fit everybody in the church, so many people were just out front, surrounding the church, whatever, because they could only fit 250. Then they led a procession from the church to the cemetery. And of course, the cemetery was located like behind Clinton High School, where the reservoir is today. So it was only about a mile away, less than that. So this procession from the church was unreal. They were children of the parish, marched first, followed by about 700 others, 20 priests and horses and carriages, 500 men, about 2,500 people were in the procession to go bury this beloved pastor. And again, the church was so overcrowded that that the floor joists started to give way and the building started to shake, and everybody had to get the heck out of there fast because the building was almost falling apart. And only a few years later, there was a new St. John's in the works anyway. But again, Father O'Keefe was 29 years old. So the next pastor was this gentleman, Father Richard Patterson, and look at how long he served. From 1868, he was a Holy Cross grad, to 1899 when he died. And he's the one that built the second building, the second St. John's Church. And he created the first St. John's School, and he also built the current beautiful building on Union Street. This was, by the way, the second St. John's Church. There's not many pictures of it. It was kind of a big, ugly building, right about where Leominster Credit Union is, not on Mechanic Street, but on Pleasant, going down the hill like toward the back of Nipro. It sat there, and if you can imagine, that first part on the right side was the new church. And it was in 1888, St. John's School ended up there, and later that part was added on. That was the school on the left, and then later on, it became the convent, the first convent for the nuns teaching there. So there's very, very few pictures of that church, but that was the second one. And then, of course, here's the current church. Patterson was built that one in August of 1875. Bishop O'Reilly, who used to be a priest at St. John's before that, set the cornerstone in place. 4,000 people attended that event, and it took about 12 years to build the church. And it obviously is magnificent, as most of you know. Now, here is the problem. We all know Clinton is famous for its gossip and all of that stuff. And so everybody knew a reservoir was coming in, and the gossip went at first from the reservoir is not going to affect our cemetery. And the next rumor was it looks like we might have to give up about half the cemetery for the reservoir. And then finally, in 1897, from the altar, Father Patterson had to announce the inevitable, which was that the state was taking the entire cemetery, 4,000 bodies, the whole thing. So I'll read you this very quickly. This came from the bishop. It was a letter read to the congregation by Father Patterson. I wish you would announce to the congregation next Sunday the names of 4 members of the cemetery committee. State that I have appointed this committee with full power to act and to transact all matters arising in connection with the probable disposal of the cemetery. I have been giving to this annoying question considerable thought, and am convinced that it is necessary that this committee should have charge of every transaction of this matter, the selection of a new site for a cemetery, if they are not satisfied with the present location, to employ an engineer and perform any matter of grading that should be adopted. They are to continue in authority till all bodies are transferred and the matter terminated. The locality should be determined without delay. The engineers must be put to work at once. Tell them that it is your and my wish that no lots be assigned and no bodies removed till the survey is complete and grading advanced. The committee should arrange to meet with the Metropolitan Water Commissioners at once. So you can just imagine the Catholics of Clinton when they heard that. I mean, it all became official that their loved ones were going to have to be dug up and moved. So a little bit off my screen here, but anyway, the original committee, was 4 people. That any better? Not too much better. The original committee was only those 4 people: Father Patterson, some T.F. Larkin, Martin Murphy, who was an undertaker, and Thomas Burns. And even in that article I just showed you, where the priest announced to the congregation that the cemetery was going to be taken, this was added in the article that I retyped. So there was already trouble brewing. Father Patterson said he totally condemned one member of the committee who has divulged the contents of the bishop's request, and added that that said member should resign, as his action had been an insult to the bishop, the other members of the committee, and to the congregation, because they should have the use of it before any newspaper scribe. So apparently one of these big mouths, I think I know who it was, but had gone to the press about, guess what, the cemetery is going to be taken and all of these things happening. I used to be a little tough on Martin Murphy, but I'm not going to be as much, because I think he was the guy, I think he was the guy that they were talking about, but I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. So at the next few slides are just pictures of the old cemetery. Most of these, we have a lot of them, and a lot of them are on that digitalcommonwealth.org, I think, or .com on the internet. So anybody can see these things. But you're going to see that looks very, very different from today's St. John's Cemetery. It was very wooded, all right? It was a wooded area with hills and valleys, very different looking than today's. You see that, they're almost like some of these gravestones are in the middle of woods. And you see hills, you see, open fields like it is today. But there's a lot of different things going on. And one of the things that you see here, which you will not see today, are these things. All right? They decided to outlaw any type of decorative type of stone. There's another one. So I don't think there are any, I could be wrong, at St. John's now, where you have like a fence around it like that, or you have what you just saw, the almost like a border stone, I think they call it. No more of that. There's a good one right there. You see this type of thing at Woodlawn all the time, but this is not Woodlawn. This is the Catholic cemetery. And so they just thought, I guess it would be easier for landscapers and everybody else to it's one big open field now. That's basically what it is. But it certainly was not in the old days at the old cemetery. I went and tried to do some research, and I actually found a few gravestones. This is the Toner grave right here. This is the old cemetery, and I found it in the new. And that's the Woods monument, and there it is there, the new cemetery. So we went and tried to find all of them we would. I don't think too many were lost along the way, but and this is I think there was probably a really misnomer about the cemetery itself. If you go up to the North Dike today and you see the little island very close to the North Dike, people think like that was the cemetery. That was one of the higher points of the cemetery. The cemetery was under the water, coming toward like Clinton High School and the North Dike, and of course under the dike, which there's no evidence of that because the dike is, hundreds of feet above what it once was. They had to cover all of that up. So all that area was the cemetery. The island itself was just a little piece of the cemetery. We still call it Cemetery Island. This is called Cemetery Ridge, which I think is looking over Sterling Way. This would be the far right end of the cemetery today. This is the consecration cross, which again on the left is in the old cemetery, and there it is today, right inside the main gate of the new cemetery. Now, I know you can't see much of this. I'll try to point something out, but this is a very early map of this area back at 1900 or so. So we're coming up Main Street. This is Main Street. And right here is the break. This would be the new Route 110, all right, which didn't exist, of course, at the time. This would be like where the Clinton Motor Inn was, right there, or still is. And then this was the main route to the cemetery, to Sandy Pond, and that's how you got to Boylston and West Boylston or whatever. There was no highway, of course. And so it was planned, and you can see that, but the main route was South Main Street. And it doesn't look like much of a main route today. And today it ends, of course, at like the McNally home right there. And of course, it starts to go up because you have the North Dike that was built. But you picture the old days when it went straight ahead, kept right on going past Sandy Pond, and just a little ways further than that was the actual St. John's Cemetery. You see over here, like Terrence O'Connor on the right, that would be Terrence Ave today. Whoops. Oh boy. This is going to be interesting. No, I don't know what happened there. Time out. Time out. Oh boy. Oh. Oh, jeez. All right. Something happened. Everybody close your eyes. I don't know. I think I hit the wrong button. That's what I did, but wow. You know, it's supposed to arrow up. I think oh, you know what? I hit a key called end. That would do it. That would do it. Yeah, right there. Oh, brother. Sorry about that. I'm very high tech. Everybody knows that. Okay, here we go. All right, here's another look at that area of Clinton. And you can see that that's the kind of the island there on the right. And you see all the landowners out there because once again, you have to imagine that there's no water there other than the sandy pond. And over here, I think we told you that, but this would be Route 110 today, like where the nursery is or whatever, would have come right down the middle of this. And this was all that land that was done by the scam. Walter Brigham had this real estate scam where he was selling property that didn't really exist. And you see all that stuff there. There wasn't a house there at all. It was all a sham. He made a lot of good money on it. And when he sold it, mostly to out-of-towners, out-of-state people, he offered to pay the taxes for them too, which should have told you something. And the reason he could pay the taxes is because the train would come by, you know, that train on South Meadow, and would set the fields on fire, and he would collect insurance and be able to pay the taxes, which were nothing because it was junk land. There was nothing up there. So he named his streets. What do we got? We got Gold Street, Grand Street, Silver Street. But then he started to smarten up, and he started calling his streets by names that already existed in town. So he named Park Street. That is not the Park Street you know. And here's Beacon Street. That's not the Beacon Street you know. But he got pretty smart about it because then people would come up to the police station or write a letter to the cops and say, I just bought a piece of land on Beacon Street. And that's okay, right? And the cops would say, yeah, Beacon Street is up on Burnett Hill. Yeah, that's fine. Beacon Street didn't exist, not that Beacon Street. So he made quite a haul for himself.
Did he get caught?
He ultimately got caught, yes. So anyway, during the middle of all of this, there was an important conference. I'm not going to read you this, but again, the whole town is buzzing. What's going to happen? What's it all about? And again, we all know how Clinton is. So the second Father Patterson got back from his big meeting with the water board, gossip and rumors started to fly left and right, so much so that he had to come out in the newspaper and announce that none of this is true, what everybody's buzzing about. I have not made a contract with anybody yet. I have not done this. I have not done that. But you couldn't tell the parishioners that because they were convinced that, you know, that's how it was. So Patterson was a tremendous administrator and again, another beloved pastor. So he knew sooner or later that his cemetery was going to be gone. So he decided to buy land for a new cemetery. And so he bought this from, anyway, I forgot that. Sorry. He bought 20 acres on Mill Street, off of Mill Street. So most people do not know that the move from the old cemetery, Cemetery Island, we'll call it, to Greeley Hill was not a direct move. All right. That came much later after legal battles and all kinds of things. The new cemetery was off of Mill Street, almost everything to the left. You go by, take High Street and go past the old Candy Cottage or whatever, take a right onto that Mill Street, and that all that new development on the left side was the cemetery. Paul Morrison lives up there, and I always tell him, I bet you your garden grows great because, you know, I said they buried like 200 people there, all right? And then they dug them up again. Later on, we'll get to that part of the story. So about 200 Catholics were buried 3 times during all this scandal, 3 times, all right? And then, of course, afterwards, and we'll get to that, but after that, when the cemetery finally was decided to go on top of Greeley Hill, what are we going to do with this place now after they dug up those bodies? So that's when they turned it into the filter beds. And so that was the new filtration area. So again, Paul and his neighbors up there have great gardens. They grow great tomatoes. And so it was either dead bodies or filtration, whatever. And now I didn't bring the thing with me. Bob Latini and I visited a woman up in that neighborhood, a few years back, and she was telling me about her grandfather that grew up in that area. It was Gorham, and it was the Gorham farm, and he's the one who bought the land ultimately from St. John's Cemetery, from St. John's Church. And in this little area, which is on the corner of Mill Street and Gorham Ave, she told us all about the fact that when the grandfather was a kid, there were open holes in this area. And they were the graves of 3 babies that had been buried there. But I guess whoever did the contract was not required to fill in the holes. And so, this man said when they were kids, they were all told to, don't be loud and screaming when you play around this area, and don't, it's almost like settle down a little bit. This was a graveyard at one time. And he remembered those holes right in this area, right on that corner. So I wish I had brought I took notes when she was talking. And in fact, when he sold the land to somebody else, he asked them to, his name, I think, was Milton Gorham. And so that was part of the deal. You got to name the streets after my family or whatever. So there's a Milton Ave and a Gorham Ave. So here's what was going on in the meantime, of course. We were looking for, we had to start setting out bids. Who's going to move these 4,000 bodies? And so, they took in all these different bids. You can see the lowest bidder was 16,000. The highest was 38,000. You see that somewhere in the middle, Martin Murphy of Clinton did bid for the job, and he was on the committee that supposedly was going to accept these bids or whatever. So I lost my spot. But anyway, in the middle of all of this, wouldn't you know that Father Patterson passed away? And his body was lied in state for 3 days, over 2,000 people attending. By then it was at the new church on Union Street. Town officials and, get this, Protestant ministers all marched together from the town hall to the church to pay homage to him. Stores closed at 10 a.m. Until after the funeral. Schools and mills closed at noon. He was really a beloved pastor, and a lot of the history says now that it was almost a blessing that he died, because he didn't get to see, thank God, the infighting that was going to start the second he passed away. So this is where he is today, right inside the main gate, off to the right slightly. There's a large circle of land. There's one monument, but I think there's 4 different priests buried there. And Father Patterson is one, and so isn't Father Dennis O'Keefe, the one from the old church up on the hill. And so there's Father Patterson as one side. There's Dennis O'Keefe on the other side, and I'm not sure of other pastors before O'Keefe. Remember, Boyce was the first, and there were probably four maybe, and then O'Keefe for only 5 or 6 months, but then Patterson for like 32 years. All right. So now here we go. Look out. I got to be careful or lightning will strike me. So here we go. But the strangest thing of all was after Patterson died, another Father O'Keefe took over. All right. This one, yes, two. So the transition was O'Keefe, Patterson, O'Keefe. But Dennis, who only lasted 5 months, was again beloved, whatever. Patterson was too. And then this was John O'Keefe. And so they were in the middle of this battle at the time. And I alluded to it, but I don't think I had a slide for it. That a committee was formed. You saw those 4 names. And then they also added a bunch of people who were owners of plots at the old cemetery. They became part of the committee. Well, then there was a lot of infighting, and almost the committee broke in half. And it appears that the issue was who's going to get this contract. And it's funny how I used to think it was such a terrible thing. And then when you see what goes on in town from time to time, I'm not sure if anything has changed. Really. You had a group of people that said, let's give this contract to the local guy. He's not the lowest bidder, but who cares? He's a local guy. Everybody knows him. He actually buried some of the people at the old cemetery. He has records. He knows it, the families, whatever. And other people, of course, were the opposite. They're not going to give it to a local guy. Let's give it to the lowest bidder. Let's save money, blah, blah, blah. And so they broke away from each other. And that's when these parishioners were constantly at each other's throats. So anyway, Father O'Keefe came along, and the second he arrived, he decided, I guess, that he was going to take over. And everything was going to be hunky-dory. And he was wrong. But anyway, I'll read you this quickly. This was from the altar. This is back in the days when the Clinton Current had his entire sermons. Many times they published the entire sermon, what he said at Sunday Mass. But here, he seems to be very positive, which didn't last very long, I must tell you. I'm pleased to tell you that we are able to find that all of the cemetery trouble of the parish is at an end. It is but due of the people that they should understand more about this matter than what has been heard. There has been a great deal of confusion in this matter. There is no such thing as responsibility anywhere. Now all are satisfied on account of my experience, which has been more than 20 years in cemetery matters, and are satisfied to leave the matter at all times in my charge. I don't wish to undertake any responsibility without knowing where the responsibility comes from. I do not want to have the responsibility thrown at me, and so I sifted the matter down. Then the Right Reverend Bishop, I have my authority from him alone, commissioned me as his agent to see to the work of the cemetery. All contracts and everything of this kind and all money should pass through my hands to be distributed in a manner that I see fit, the responsibility to be with me alone. So if there is anything wrong in the future, you can blame me for it. So he took complete control, but in essence, he had no control. He just didn't know it yet. All right. So the two groups that were fighting, and he thought just by his appearance it was all going to be settled. Finally, it got so bad, this one committee that had broke into 2 committees ended up suing each other. And the reason they did was one of the committees went and signed a contract with, I think it was Cooney and Coughlin, which was a company to move all the bodies. So they just went and did that, and that was going to be fine, apparently. And the other half of the committee, and I'm going to imagine it's the one that Martin Murphy was on, said, no, you can't do that. You don't have that authority to do that. So they sued each other. And wouldn't you know that John Hardy, Judge John Hardy, basically announced his verdict was that that contract by Coughlin and Cooney was not executed under proper authority, and it is the whole contract is null and void. And we took a giant step backwards at that point. So the guy behind all of this, and I said I'd been tough on him at times, but was Martin Murphy. Martin Murphy lived in this house you see on Greeley Hill, way up the top, almost only 2 or 3 homes before the cemetery. And his business was at the very top of Church Street, was his funeral home. And those of you who went to the old Clinton High School, right around kind of between Clinton High and the old fire station was like a barn or whatever. That was where he kept his horses and his carriages and all of that. So he owned quite a bit of property, and he had quite a bit of influence as well. So he was a very popular undertaker. There's no doubt about that. People trusted him, and this whole issue about the legal suit was about who's going to get the contract. That's really what it was all about. And again, he had buried most of the bodies anyway, and somewhere along the line, it was deemed that his records were private records. So he wasn't going to give them to anybody else anyway. All right. Now remember, the cemetery was 50 years old. And the old part of the cemetery, no one knew where the hell the bodies were. They really didn't. It wasn't as easy as we think. It wasn't a monument and a gravestone, and we know there's 3 bodies there. The one end of the cemetery, the old end, they did not know where bodies were. They had no clue. And so I don't think Murphy probably had the records, but I think the parishioners in general wanted to see Murphy get the contract. So then it started. And the digging up of the bodies was quite a chore. It actually started in late December. They said it was an extremely warm day, pouring rain. The Italian immigrants who were doing most of the digging were in short sleeves. One thing Murphy had done was he, as part of the contract, was he would go get family members rather than have them show up, because they were entitled to show up and watch their loved ones being dug up. He, as an added service, because he knew everybody in town, he would go get the family because he knew that the Smith people were going to be dug up that day. So he went to get the family, and then he would drive them right there in the horse and buggy, and they could see what was going on. And then they painted a big number on the casket. And in the contract, there was all this stuff that if the shovel went through the casket, there was a casket company in Oakdale that had to provide a new casket. Some of the stories, of course, were a little, I don't know if you're into the strange and untrue, maybe. I don't even know. I really don't. But there was the usual talk about bodies that rolled over in their casket, for instance, and those types of things. And, true or not, who knows? I mean, certainly medicine at the time, 1847 was when the cemetery was formed. So bodies started to go in there in 1847. And by about 1897, 98, they were getting buried in off Mill Street. And then after about 1899, if you were a Catholic and died, you went to the new cemetery. So there was talk that, they would dig up bodies and there would be no body there. There would just be, colored sand or something. And when they did that, they would just throw whatever that was, remains of somebody, into a casket with maybe somebody that was buried beside them. And that's how they had to do it. There were no accurate records. And on the old part of the cemetery, this is what they had to do. They had to go down 6 feet. That was the only thing they could do. And go all the way down and just take all the soil out and hoped that they found, bodies or whatever. So it was pretty gross work, needless to say. All right. Now the town of Clinton would not let the bodies go through the center of town, and so there was a tremendous fear of disease. Of course, they firmly believed that if, like, you died of smallpox in 1847, and you were buried there, and they opened your grave, that you would get smallpox. That's how it worked. So they had this thing where they, almost like your chlorine in a pool, I think it was chloride, and they had this in a bottle, and they would shake it over the casket or the open casket, whatever they discovered in there, and they thought that that would probably ease the problem and would not spread any disease or whatever. But it was pretty gross work. There are no real records of what happened. There was another cemetery that was dug up in West Boylston, the Beeman Cemetery. And that one, we actually have a copy of the diary of the man who was in charge of digging those bodies up. And the stories that he wrote were pretty wild. They really were. But there doesn't seem to be any kind of record of the Clinton bodies being buried. So anyway, he had to find a way to bring these bodies to the new St. John's Cemetery, which I forgot to mention, of course, after all of this craziness and one committee suing the other, the priest dying, the new one taking over. What happened is that Martin Murphy decided to go out and buy a plot of land on the top of Greeley Hill. And he was, I guess, representing his half of that committee, okay? But however, the deed ended up in his name, his own name. So after all was said and done, and it took about 6 or 8 months to clean up this whole mess, Martin Murphy ended up with the contract. The new cemetery was on top of Greeley Hill, where it is today. The state took over Mill Street and made it into the filter beds, because it was all really, even the filter beds was a Wachusett Reservoir related project. So I guess everybody was happy. Coughlin and Cooney wasn't too happy because they had signed a legitimate contract, but that's the one that the judge said no can do. So they lucked out. So Murphy ended up being in charge of the whole thing. And this was the route they took. Now, I want to tell you the story. In maybe the late 80s, my son has always been interested in local history, so I managed to get him to walk the trail for me, with me. And I said, we ought to just see, the trail that the bodies took from the old to the new. We didn't think we'd find any dead bodies along the side of the road or anything, but we thought that might be kind of cool just to do it one day. So we followed the trail, which this is South Meadow Road, the beginning, and Route 110. And the cemetery was right over that hill to the right. Okay, so they had to come this way. And of course, they had to come across the causeway between the two ponds. They were open wagons, and they were 4 caskets to a wagon. And they just did the bodies. Somebody else by the name of Gallagher was in charge of moving the gravestones, all right? And do remember, any other decorative stones were not allowed at the new cemetery. So the granite urns, the border stones, the fencing, the granite posts, none of that was allowed at the new cemetery anyway. So then this is Route 62, and now this is me standing here looking back toward South Meadow, Clinton, okay? And then at the time, and again, remember, these slides are from 88, 89, 90 maybe, somewhere in there. Off of Buttrick Lane, you know where that is? It's just right around the railroad tracks on Route 62, the other end of South Meadow Road. There was this beautiful little dirt road. And so we decided to go down there because we knew that the bodies came in the back of St. John's Cemetery, where that green building is today. That's where the bodies came through somehow. So we followed this road, and there's the road. Of course, on the right, this is what it looks like today. It's somebody's driveway. That's the problem. But anyway, the amazing thing is, of course, we had no idea if this was even the way they came, but we kind of figured it was. And then we saw this stuff in the bushes all over the place. We found a good 6 or 8 of them. We have no idea how they got there, and I have no idea where they are today. I would have put them in a garden or something. Now, please remember, these are not gravestones. These are those extra type of stones that would have been in the old cemetery, but I don't know why they would have brought them to the new one only to throw them away because they were outlawed up there. So those were pretty cool. And the second my son and I saw those, we realized, well, this had to be the route. It had to be the way they came. Nowadays, in the old Bates Pit, there's all the housing developments in there, and I don't even know if that road continues. I'm not brave enough to go down that driveway anymore and ask anybody. I used to be, but. And then it's funny, on South Meadow Road, Lancaster side, there's a house set way, way back. Maybe you know who lives there, I'm not sure. But look at the entrance to the driveway. And I have half a mind to knock on the door and say, I know where the hell you got these things. You took them from your backyard somewhere in the road, and you found them in the woods. Make you bet. And I bet you they did. I mean, those have been there since I was a kid, but I always noticed them when I went by. And then after discovering these things along the road, they had to be from the old St. John Cemetery. So here's what it looked like as it was clearing out. They were moving about 50 bodies a day. Again, back-breaking work, kind of gross work. The Italians at times were superstitious. There was a lot of weirdness going on. There was they were not allowed to how do they call it? Speak freely. They had to be very careful about what they said, the words they used, and things like that. Plus, also the plot owners were nearby watching them, so it was like delicate type of work. And so this is on the right is probably the edge of the island. But this shows you today where the water is, and that was the cemetery too. And over on the left is probably the start of the North Dike, which covered part of the cemetery. This is the shot, State Archives, of the new cemetery on the top of Greeley Hill. And so anyway, again, what I didn't mention, you can tell I hadn't done this in a long time. I told you about the conflict, which was finally resolved as far as Murphy got the contract. The state paid St. John's Church $92,000 for the old cemetery. The state took over the other cemetery and made it filter beds, and it seemed like everybody was happy. And the parishioners who were at each other's throat kind of got together and formed one big happy committee all over again. No more infighting in the church. Wasn't that wonderful? The trouble was that they decided, and I don't know who did, maybe it was Martin Murphy, I blame him for everything else, but they decided to form a legal entity, and they became St. John Cemetery Association, all right? And parishioners owned it and could buy stock in it, okay? The problem is the church didn't own it. St. John's Cemetery was not owned by St. John's Church. And Father O'Keefe was kind of upset about that. And so every Sunday he would be hammering away at the congregation. And here's, you got to read, we have to read some of these great comments. This was great. Although I have before this stated my position on cemetery matters, I think under present conditions it may be repeated. Having been appointed by the highest authority of the diocese to be your leader and head, I cannot consistently occupy any other place. In other words, I got to be in charge whether you like it or not. Thus far, I have acted as the bishop's agent in cemetery matters, he being one of 3 parties to the contract for the purchase of the old cemetery by the Metropolitan Water Board. I understand hereafter this authority will be removed by the movement on hand to place it forever absolutely under lay control. Should this happen, St. John Cemetery will be to me the same as Woodlawn Cemetery. For what is to prevent it from being managed and controlled by men who not only deny, but do not even practice their religion, and therefore are not Catholics? Well, and moreover, considering the manner in which the bishop and his agent has been treated, I will neither ask for its consecration or approve of its being done. I would say that people engaged in this movement could easily be in more honorable and Catholic employment. I shall do nothing to oppose their schemes, for I feel that there has been too much publicity and scandal already, and I, for one, have too much respect for my name and character than to have either publicly connected with this affair. So they were both sides were digging in big time. This guy was whacking them every Sunday sermon, screaming at them, saying, "Whoever heard of a Catholic cemetery that didn't belong to the Catholic Church?" And it didn't. It belonged to the association, which was run by all parishioners, businessmen. So anyway, almost a year after the project and the reservoir was starting to fill, it took about 8 years to fill, Perini, an Italian immigrant who later ran Perini Construction in Framingham or Natick, he found 5 more bodies. And they didn't recognize what they were. And I'm not going to read you the whole article, but he found them, I think, about 3 to 5 feet deep in the gravel. They were 6 feet below the surface of the ground. All the bodies had been in the ground many years. In all but one case, there was nothing to make possible the identification of the remains. In one of the coffins, there was a plate which gave the name and additional information, only that the deceased was 67 years of age and died May 31, 1881. And 3 of the bodies were infants, 2 of them having died when very young, and the third probably 3 or 4 years old. The 5th body was that of a mature woman. So this was a whole family buried, and they missed it when they were digging them. Hopefully they got them all, since that's their drinking water. But, you know. A real sad story that occurred of that. This was back in the days, and I'm showing my true colors as a Catholic or whatever, pseudo-Catholic. But they even found the bodies of some babies buried right outside the gates of the cemetery, and neighbors in the area. There weren't very many, but they remembered seeing like a lantern or a light and somebody going out in the middle of the night, probably an infant who died. And of course, the Catholics would not let an infant that would be so guilty of so many things to be buried in the Catholic cemetery. So they wasn't allowed. So these people would go in the middle of the night and bury the body outside the gates, just to say that it was so close to the Catholic cemetery. I call that the Dark Ages, but that's up to you what you call it. But anyway, so those types of stories were happening all the time. So anyway, Murphy was done with everything. People were generally happy. This is the new cemetery, of course. This is Murphy's bill. We have a copy of it. Again, they moved something like 4,000 bodies. Started in December, I think, of 1899, and it was done in like a year and a half. And then, of course, after that, they found a few more bodies. But anyway, so I've always been tough on Father O'Keefe because he was a hellion, no doubt about it. But he did do some good things, and this has changed since I did this show in the 1980s when I was always on his case. He did some good things for the church. There was no doubt about it. He's the one that brought in the chimes, and those are real pictures of the chimes arriving and the blessing of the chimes. The picture at the top is the priest grounds. That was the arch that he built. That's Union Street. So the gym would be just around the corner to the right today. And the wall is still there partially. You know, the wall that starts right after the Presbyterian Church, that was part of this structure. And O'Keefe did that too. When St. John's Church was built, it had wooden steps. All the steps were wooden. Father O'Keefe is the one that brought in granite steps. He did some other things too. Um, and he was big time, anti-liquor, and he would follow almost these liquor carriers around to see where they delivered the booze. And he would, call out people, I think, in church as well, just right there and then. And that's how he was. And he actually was behind filing two different legislative bills about illegal booze at the time. He created the Guild House. That's where Dr. O'Toole's office used to be on Union Street. And the Starr's house beside it was the barn, and that became the Guild House, where he offered classes. And I wrote an article about it in the Item a few years back, where he didn't put it the right way. He didn't always say the things the correct way, but he offered classes to make women useful, and and so they were on sewing and knitting and cooking and things like that, and he another thing that he did, which I thought was really kind of cool, is that he would go up to that Guild House, and he would put on classical music outside on the porch and blast it towards Central Park, like one day a week. And people would come from all over town to sit in the park and listen to the classical music. And in some ways, it's the forerunner of what we do all summer long. What is it? Every Tuesday night, there's some kind of concert. He started that too. So he did some good things. It's just that I think he was as stubborn as the parishioners who wouldn't give in and hand over things. So things got really bad. So a group of Clinton people decided that this guy's got to go. And so they went to the bishop and said, get him out of here. And of course, Father O'Keefe couldn't leave it alone. So once his transfer was official, he had this to say to his parishioners: I have accepted the rectorship of the Church of St. Agnes in Dalton, that I may seek the rest and quiet that my age and health would seem to demand, which rest and quiet seem to be denied me in St. John's, Clinton. After the active life of the last 11 years here, it is no wonder that I seek rest and peace. He was quite a guy. So look at the dates of these things. I don't expect you to read them, but as soon as he was gone, the second he was out the door, October 26, that cemetery association and all of its stockholders, all of them voted to say, let's turn this cemetery over to the church. And they did. And look at the date of the next thing, November 23. So less than 1 month later, the bishop, see that article, the bishop officiates. So the bishop came to St. John's, and it was quite an affair there. So 1 month later, the bishop confirmed 325 children at St. John's. Every seat was filled, including the 2 balconies, chock full. And a parade was formed from the church to the new cemetery. And that's where he consecrated the ground. And remember, as I think I did cover that part, O'Keefe wouldn't do it. He said, I'm not going to step foot in that cemetery unless it's my cemetery, our church cemetery. So for 10 years, 10 years, all those Catholics that were buried up there, that was not, consecrated ground, So only after they got rid of him, the bishop came, consecrated the ground, spread the holy water on the consecration cross. They had prayers, huge parade all the way up. People joined them. It was almost like a Memorial Day parade. People alongside the streets from the church to the top of Greeley Hill, lining the streets, some of them joining the parade itself. And they blessed the grounds, and they have been ever since. So anyway, it really is kind of a strange thing how all of this happened. Here's what we call Cemetery Island today. I took these pictures a long time ago. It's such a peaceful, quiet, tranquil area. It really is kind of hard to believe that this area was such a center of such controversy or whatever. I took this right out of the St. John's history book. To the pioneer Catholics of St. John's Parish, strength in their hands, truth on their lips, virtue in their hearts, and then I added, and a little stubbornness on the side. So that's the story of St. John's and the cemetery. Any questions? Yes,
During that
Bobby, you want to get the lights? Do you mind?
8 or 10 years, when O'Keefe wouldn't even set foot in the cemetery,
Yep.
who buried all those dead Catholics?
I don't know if he got somebody else to do it, or it was simply, the funeral home and maybe, I mean, at the time, St. John's probably had 4 priests in charge, but he was the pastor. So maybe he just kind of took those 10 years off from burials and that kind of thing. But I mean, he was a pretty stubborn guy, and yet I realize now I've grown up since 1985. I really have. I used to really pound on Martin Murphy for being like such a political character. He was a local guy. He knew everybody. He had buried some of the people. I don't see anything wrong with that in a way. He wasn't the lowest bidder. And likewise, the same with O'Keefe. He was just, I want it this way. Who ever heard of a Catholic cemetery that wasn't owned by the Catholic Church? So he was pretty mad about that. And every Sunday he would pound on them. Yes, Mark.
I think you referred to the road from South Meadow on as the causeway.
Well, not really, but
Yeah.
it's very narrow, and they fixed it up.
Is it possible that was constructed particularly for the movement of the cemetery?
I don't think it was, but I think it was improved because of the cemetery. So believe it or not, it was even more narrow than it is today, but they kind of cleaned it up a little bit.
Okay, and the current cemetery, St. John's, is in Lancaster.
Yes, yes,
And wasn't that originally something called the Lancaster Fairgrounds?
yes,
Yeah,
yep.
okay.
I think that was more the close part that's now starting to fill in, but
Yeah.
that big, long area. But so I think it might have been fairgrounds even when bodies were being buried there. But they started them more in the back and way over to the right, and the fair was more over to the left. And the fair ended in, I don't know, 1915 or 1918. And so it wasn't too much of an overlap.
So where do they get the space that when they need it? Next.
Yeah, I don't know. They're going to have to build up or something. Somebody told me, what do you call it? Reservoir Pines is very close to being full, and they're going to have to expand that somehow.
I believe that was designed to be filled in going closer to the track.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a little bit of room, and the old track runs right through there. So I think there is a little bit of room. I don't think there's too much room, but
I think a couple of
know.
acres.
yep. Yes, Gene, how are you?
All bodies from the reservoir to Mill Street and then.
No, all of this legal crap was going on, and Father Patterson said, we got to find a new place. So he went out on his own and bought the 20 acres and made that the new cemetery. And so people dying then were being buried in that cemetery. And I think he thought that was going to be the permanent one until Martin Murphy and the legal suit and all this stuff happened. And then it was time out. You know?
But the move is moving. So when they actually moved from the reservoir,
Yeah.
they moved. Not everybody got moved to Mill Street. So-
No, only about 200 bodies but those I think were people dying then, I think. I think those were people, yeah, I don't think they were digging them up. Some of them were dug up, I'm sorry. Some of them were dug up and reburied. Others that died then, there was a terrible horse and buggy accident on Union and Maine. And that got a lot of play in the paper. And that father and daughter were buried immediately up at Mill Street. So But some of them were buried 3 times.
Are there any bodies that never made it up?
I have no idea. I mean, yeah, there probably is some, I don't know, but that's what I meant about like these stories about it. I mean, we're not going to imagine that everybody up there was buried and they weren't dead or something. But could that have happened in 1 or 2 or 3 cases with medical being the medical field being the way it was? Yeah, I think that's a possibility, but who's to say? I mean, I don't know. Yes,
Who did the landscape design for the layout of the cemetery, where you're gonna put, those nice monuments and everything else?
I don't know. I should know that, but I don't know that.
I mean, it wasn't thrown in there helter-skelter, if you ever been,
No,
go up
no,
there. Very
no.
well put together.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that Patterson's, the bishop's letter that Patterson read was trying to say that I don't think they could, people could say, I want my mom and dad buried right here in this spot, right inside the gate, or this or that. There was none of that. It was, they set up where you were going to be buried. I don't think you had a choice in the new cemetery. They dug up the bodies and they said, this is where this one's going to go. This is where this one's going to go. I don't think they took requests or anything like that.
Like some of the big thing, like the big gate on David I. Walsh Gate.
Yep, yep.
and then a few other big monuments there.
Yep. I think that came much later, though. I mean, that would have been after David I died, right?
Right.
And so, so that, I don't think there was a big, huge gate.
Well, I'm not just talking about that, just some of the other things around the cemetery that they were, set in there.
Yeah, yes, yep. That I don't know. I forgot to mention that Patterson's mother was buried up there too. And Patterson left 2 brothers in Clinton, Joseph and I forgot the other one. But anyway, so I don't know if he still has relatives, whatever. But no, I don't know. He went to Holy Cross. One more weird thing about O'Keefe, the other O'Keefe, the crazy O'Keefe, whatever. He was actually acting pastor for so many months when Father Patterson went to Rome to bring back the relics of Saint, somebody help me, Domitilla, yes. And he went to Rome to bring back the relics of Saint Domitilla. This O'Keefe was the acting pastor, and then he went back to wherever he came from. And last thing I want to say is when O'Keefe ended up going to Dalton, which the newspapers were very nice about him. It was the first time they I think, were very political as far as, everyone's going to miss him. He was so wonderful and all this kind of stuff. They weren't too wonderful to him the way things were going, but after he left, they were. But I had heard that he did some very good things in Dalton, helping people out. His housekeeper was his sister, too. His sister in Clinton. His sister was his housekeeper, and then he took her to Dalton, and in Dalton, she was his housekeeper. That's sweet, yes. Anything else? All right, we still have 50-50. 50-50. Thank you.